Regular Monday press conference in which we ordinarily talk about two things. The first is an update on gun violence from the prior week, and the second is an issue of significance or importance. We are delighted today to have the opportunity to talk about the expansion of the capacity of the Philadelphia courts to do jury trials. Recently, the capacity has been 4 per week. As of today, through the incredibly hard and capable work of judicial leadership, we are able to expand from 4 jury trials to 8 jury trials. I'll be talking at length about what that means in a moment, but the bottom line is this. For witnesses, for victims, and for defendants who, due to the pandemic, despite best efforts by the Public Defender's Office, the DA's office, by private counsel, despite best efforts by the court, have had to wait. That wait is over. We are at the point where we will get back to a system that is able to run more efficiently, so that accountability comes more quickly, so that there is resolution for the guilty and the innocent, and there is accountability where it belongs. And that is a very, very, very important moment, given what we have been through over almost exactly the last 2 years. So we are here to lift up and applaud the incredible work done by everyone, but especially by judicial leadership to make this day a possibility. I'd like to acknowledge some of the people who are here for this press conference. We have with us Catherine Cacciamani, that is K-A-T-H-R-Y-N, Cacciamani, C-A-C-C-I-A-M-A-N-I, from the Private Defense Bar. Kate Cacciamani, who will be speaking a little bit later, is someone that I think all of us have known for a little while. She has been doing criminal justice work in Philadelphia as a public defender and also as a private attorney now for 28 years. And she is currently the co-chair of the criminal justice section for the Philadelphia Bar Association. She is also the liaison to the private bar, who informs them of significant developments and reflects their viewpoint. Kate Cacciamani has been very involved in the process that got us here to this day. We have with us Carolyn Temin, who is a first assistant district attorney in Philadelphia. We have Joanne Pescatore, the chief of the DA's office's Homicide and Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. Deborah Watson-Stokes is here, senior advisor in our office for professional development and special projects, and her special projects revolve around gun violence. We have with us the Reverend Myra Maxwell, who is the executive director of the DAO's Victim Support Services Division. That division includes our CARES unit, and we have Melanie Nelson here, the director of the DAO's CARES unit, which is the Crisis Assistance Response and Engagement for Survivors unit that works intensively with the families of homicide victims, especially during the first 45 days. We expected to have Public Defender Keisha Hudson here with us today. Unfortunately, a conflict came up that made her appearance here impossible, but we are delighted to make sure you're aware of the hard work the Public Defender's Office has done to get us here today. I'm going to turn to some of the gun violence information first, and then we'll switch to our other topic. As of today, there are 102 homicides, and by today I actually mean through March the 13th at midnight, 102 homicides. In the same period last year there were 100. The increase is at 2%. During the prior week, we had 9 homicides and 35 non-fatal shootings. That is, of course, awful. All of this is awful. But it does indicate a number slightly below what we have come to expect, which is about 10.5 homicides per week. There were 120 gun possession or gun violence incidents during the week. 79 arrests were made and 78 cases were charged based upon those arrests. Median bail set for possession of a gun, according to my data, $175,000. Median bail set for violent offenses committed with guns, $300,000. That does not include those who were held without bail because it was a gun homicide charged in the first degree. As you are well aware, I consider that to be more evidence that cash bail system fails. because especially for those violent offenses committed with guns, that's just inadequate. $300,000 bail actually turns into $10,000 if you go to a bail bondsman. And that is just insufficient given the level of danger that we are trying to address. I'd like to turn my attention briefly to a few shooting incidents. The first is a double shooting that occurred on Friday, March the 11th at about 2:12 p.m. on the 1900 block of East Washington Lane. Victim number one is an approximately 28-year-old black male who was shot once in the head and once in the right hand. He was taken to Einstein by police where he was placed in critical condition. Victim number two is an approximately 21-year-old black male shot in the arm and multiple times in the leg. He was taken to Einstein where he was placed in stable condition. At this time, no arrest has been made by Philadelphia police and the investigation is very active and remains ongoing. Anyone with information, please contact the PPD's Shooting Investigation Group at 215-686-8270. That's 215-686-8270. This shooting happened on the same block as a Philadelphia public school, the Samuel Pennypacker Elementary School at 1858 Washington Lane, and Masjidullah, where Imam Idris Abdul Zahir just held an appreciation breakfast for crime victim advocates recently. Our community engagement team and victim support services division have responded to the shooting incident, providing support to the community and to faith institutions. Second incident is a shooting incident where there is a homicide. This occurred on Saturday, March the 12th at about 4:43 p.m. in the 300 block of East Ashmead. An approximately 17-year-old black male was found inside a home suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. He was taken to Einstein where he was pronounced. There is only very limited information that we are willing or able to provide at this time in relation to that matter. This is an investigation that is ongoing. As many of you are aware, it may involve a juvenile, and because of the legal restraints placed upon that, as well as because of the good judgment and morality that surrounds doing a thorough investigation and rather than sensationalizing a case, we have very little comment on that. However, ADA Joanne Pescator is the chief of our homicide unit, will be available shortly to answer questions regarding incidents of gun violence. I'm going to briefly give an opportunity to Melanie Nelson, who's the director of our CARES unit, to address an update of what CARES has been doing. I have the numbers, but I'd rather hear it from Melanie. It is my pleasure to introduce Melanie Nelson.
Thank you, DA Krasner. Greetings. As the DA stated, CARES, the CARES program is a very unique program where our responders are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are deployed to crime scenes and to hospitals to where we can provide real-time service to those co-homicide survivors. CARES responded to 9 families, 10 family members total, during the week of 3/6/2022 to 3/11/2022, providing 30 services to those families in need. If you are a co-homicide survivor and you are in need of services, you can contact us at 215-686-8019. Again, 215-686-8019. Please know we care. So when you see us in your community, we care, we love you, and you have our condolences. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. At this time, I'd like to turn to our main topic and the reason why we are standing out here in front of the Criminal Justice Center. Mr. Elmore, how are you, sir? I see distinguished members of the defense bar who've been working in criminal justice for a very long time here. They should be here. They should be interested in what is happening, which I consider to be good news for the entire system. So a little bit of information before Kate Cacciamani steps up and says some words about this. On March 8th of 2020, right before the pandemic shut down the courts, and by shut down I mean partially shut down, but in significant ways, at that time 807 cases were disposed the week of March 8th, 807 cases. On March the 16th, a statewide judicial emergency was declared in 2020, which had far-reaching effects on all of criminal justice, on policing, on probation and parole, but also on the courts. As a result, and through no fault of the public defender's office, the DA's office, or the courts themselves, which have to deal with the extremely difficult challenge of having hundreds or even a few thousand people come into the criminal justice center, congregate in rooms, in hallways, in lobbies during a pandemic. At its height, the backlog of open criminal cases reached 43,534. That was about a year later, on March the 7th of 2021. And the total open caseload in Philadelphia courts grew by more than 50% during the pandemic. This is unprecedented in my career, which is now 34 years. Absolutely unprecedented and a tremendous challenge. Consider, for example, this. It used to be to do a jury trial, you needed one courtroom. You could pick the jury in that courtroom. You could put 12 jurors plus alternates into a box, all sitting right next to each other. You could have witnesses and lawyers walking up and down without masks, without plexiglass, literally within feet of witnesses, the judge, court officers, etc. One courtroom. The result of the pandemic is we needed three courtrooms. One courtroom where you could conduct the trial with the jury now seated where the audience used to be because they have to spread out. A separate courtroom for people who wanted to exercise a constitutional right to attend so they could, by closed-circuit TV, sit in a way that was healthy and safe in a separate location, and then a third courtroom where other things were going on that involved witnesses or involved jurors, other necessary things. That is a tremendous burden for any court system to bear. We continue to operate with that kind of a burden at this time. We continue because the courts are committed to following CDC guidelines to operate within those constraints. During the week of March 6, 2022, the criminal courts closed 1,130 cases. Let me go back. I said to you that 2 years ago they disposed of 807. Well, with all of this hard work, the week of March 6th, they disposed of more, 1,130 cases. Do they need to? Yes, because there still is a caseload. Do they need to? Yes, because we're dealing with a situation in which cases take a longer period of time to dispose. And that is bad for everyone. It is bad for victims. It is bad for witnesses. It is bad for defendants who want their case to be heard. That's bad for everyone. But the fact that we are disposing of more cases now than before the pandemic is a remarkable and necessary achievement. And we need to lift up the leadership of the courts for heading this difficult effort. As of last Friday, March the 11th, there were 33,433 open criminal cases in Philly. Now that is down from a year ago when it was 10,000 more. So we are making progress, but it's still higher than the number of cases that existed before the pandemic itself occurred. Our major trials unit is ready to proceed on all of the jury trials that are being scheduled today, and I will give you the details on that in a moment. The Philadelphia jail population has also stabilized despite the sharp increase in the proportion of defendants who are still awaiting trial and the sharp increase in how many of them face more serious charges. Part of what happened during the pandemic is police made fewer charges for less serious offenses. And so we ended up in a situation where the population of the jail at this time has a larger portion of more serious cases. These are cases like gun violence cases, homicides, non-fatal and fatal shootings, carjackings, sexual assaults. Right now, about 4,500 people are being held in Philadelphia County jails, including about 100 people who are awaiting transport to state custody. Those are people, most of whom have already been sentenced to a state sentence, but are in county at the moment because the state authorities are not ready to receive them or have them transported. The population of people, despite all these challenges, who are being held in Philly jails at this time is on par with population levels since 2018, when policing and prosecutorial reforms sharply reduced incarceration for nonviolent misdemeanors related to homelessness, drug possession, mental illness, sex work, and petty theft. Let me be more specific. When we came into office January of 2018, there were about 6,500 people in the county jails. That number now is about 4,500. So we have kept our commitment to try to do what we can about ending mass incarceration while simultaneously keeping those who present the greatest danger to the community in custody wherever we are able to obtain the bails that we need in this highly flawed cash bail system. In technical terms, the great achievement, the great moment today is this. While some other jurisdictions have not done a single jury trial in the last 2 years, Philadelphia dug in and has been trying as hard as they can to keep things moving. We have been operating for an extended period of time with a maximum of 4 jury trials in this courthouse. 21 cases are listed for those 4 jury trials ordinarily. Well, today is different. Today we are able to accommodate 8 jury trials. The number of jury trials that can be tried now in the CJC has doubled compared to last week. Why is that important? Well, obviously it's important because people need their day in court and we can try more of those cases. But what is even more significant is that cases have a way of working out when there's actually a room that is available to try it. Even the most serious cases, rape cases, shooting cases, homicide cases. There is a tendency for the system in the most serious cases to continue and continue and continue those trials when a room is not available. This is understandable at many levels. But when the day comes and that jury is available and a decision has to be made, this is an engine for the resolution of cases that have been stalled because the threat of a jury trial happening was limited. It was confined by the capacity of the system. Tremendously, tremendously important moment in terms of the capacity to resolve more serious cases, of which we have many. I can tell you right now, the number of open homicides is over 600. It's about 650 plus. That's a lot of homicides that need to get tried. And the availability of courtrooms where they can be tried is the right thing for everyone, both in terms of the trials themselves and in terms of resolution. Other units that try a lot of cases, for example, our family violence sexual assault unit, have more courtrooms available where matters can get resolved. So this is very good news for a system that has a disproportionate quantity of serious, high-end cases that need to get resolved, both in terms of trials, but also in terms of potential non-trial resolutions of those cases. I want to personally thank everyone who's worked so hard on this, including the Honorable Lucretia Clemens, who is in charge of the criminal justice section of the courts. I'd also like to thank the Administrative Judge Lizette Sheridan-Harris and Heidi Fox as well for their leadership in this regard. I want to thank Keisha Hudson, our public defender, who meets with judicial leadership and with our office and also with Ms. Cacciamani weekly to try to work these kinds of issues out. And I want to thank the private bar, represented here by Kate Cacciamani, for everything that they have done to try to make sure we can get to the point where the system is working. At this point, I'd like to call forward Ms. Cacciamani, who has a few words, and then after that, I'll have just a couple more comments, and we will go directly to questions. Kate?
Thank you, DA Krasner, and thank you for inviting me here today. I want to echo what DA Krasner has said about the courts here in Philadelphia. There was obviously a huge backlog of criminal cases in Philadelphia once the COVID-19 pandemic set in. However, through the very hard work and thinking outside the box of all the criminal justice partners that Larry has mentioned, I'm happy to report, as you heard from DA Krasner, that the backlog is being alleviated. I'd especially like to thank the First Judicial District, whose judges made this possible. The judicial leadership team of Judge Lizette Sheridan-Harris, Lucretia Clemens, and Judge Patrick Dugan of Municipal Court. They should be recognized for putting in the hard work and brain power to make this happen. They alleviated this logjam of cases and better delivered justice for Philadelphians, on the defense side, on the prosecution side, and for all the citizens of Philadelphia. Judge Clemens is always willing to listen, has in-person meetings with us, as DA Krasner mentioned, weekly, and she wants to brainstorm and come up with solutions. That's why Philadelphia is not like a lot of other jurisdictions with their backlog of cases. We are working through them, and justice is being delivered. Now, we believe these changes have really made an impact on the citizens of Philadelphia, and we're hopeful that this line of communication is going to continue even beyond the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for all you do to make sure that the private bar are informed. Not a small task when you have a lot of attorneys who have their own law practice, such as some of the distinguished attorneys showing up here. It's hard for them to be in touch sometimes. Very important work that Kate does and the Bar Association does in terms of keeping them apprised. So the truth is, we still face a backlog. We still face more cases than we had before the pandemic hit, and many of those cases are more serious for the reasons that I've already mentioned. The courts face challenges with staffing, real challenges. So does our public defender. So does the district attorney's office. Private attorneys, many of whom received part of their compensation from court-appointed work, have faced an extremely tough period, and we are in the only state in the United States where public defense work and court-appointed work is not supported by the state, which is ridiculous. We run our criminal justice here about how we run our public education. The state apparently doesn't care. Sorry to say it, but it's true. So what do we need to do? Well, obviously, there's a lot that we need to do as society opens up, and there's a lot that we need to do in terms of enforcement. But accountability requires that government put its money where its mouth is. And that means that funding for public defenders, funding for district attorneys, proper funding for private attorneys who do court-appointed work, proper funding for the courts is necessary. It is essential. It doesn't make any sense to try to build a table and not put 3 legs on it. And we are those 3 legs. Moving forward, we will be asking the city to keep its commitment, its real commitment to justice, to diversity, to fairness to everyone. And that will require the kind of support that we hope and expect we will be receiving. This is a very important moment for victims of crime, for co-victims, for survivors of homicides, for their families. Many of them have been waiting a very long time for justice. Many of them have lived under concern and fear about the passage of time, either through the thought of possible intimidation or simply because of the anxiety that goes with the process. And this is good news for them, that we will start to see the number of days from the beginning of a case to the end of the case shorten, that we will start to see people whose cases are not continued repeatedly, so we can have closure, so we can have conclusion, so we can have a feeling that accountability is real, because accountability is real, and it will be coming in a very real way, in a very quick way, compared to how it has been over the last 2 years. It's incredibly important stuff. All right. Are there any questions about the subject matter of this press conference? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
You're going to be before City Council in a couple of weeks for your budget hearing. How much more do you want? I mean, you said you're going to have an ask. You need more money. How much more does it take?
You know, we'll give the specific number. I know what the number is. It's not a tremendous amount more, but it's necessary. I don't want to speak for the courts, and I don't want to speak for the public defenders. I don't know what their numbers are, but I can tell you it's more than we have. And it's time to pay the bill, simply put. We need to get this done. We need to get it done right. These are some very serious cases, and we need the support that will enable us to compensate attorneys correctly, to reduce the number of them who are going to other higher paying jobs, including other higher paying jobs as prosecutors. We need the funding that's going to keep them where they are so that their caseloads are not overwhelming. Are there other questions?
What changed? It's still 3 courtrooms per trial. What changed?
There have been a lot of steps to this, but the courts have been diligently following CDC guidelines, and the CDC guidelines place certain requirements on how things can be done. I can give you a couple of examples of issues that the courts have worked through that have enabled this. So, for example, there were a number of people who were in custody who had already been sentenced to go to drug treatment. Their sentence was that they could go immediately, and there was a drug treatment bed available, but there was no way to transport them. That's a problem we were able to work through. And as a result of working that through, those people moved, creating more space. We have had periods of time when it was very difficult to bring people down from custody just to go to trial. There have been periods when 2/3 of the people on the list to be brought down to go to trial could not be brought, and they were not being brought not because they were sick with COVID, but they were housed on a block where someone had COVID. It took a while to work through that whole process. Make no mistake that our jails are having their own challenges as well. It took a while to work through that process so that people scheduled for jury trials could be placed outside of a block where someone else had COVID. They could be tested, and after a period of 3 days they could be brought down. And now, instead of seeing 2/3 of the list not brought down, we're seeing maybe less than 10% not brought down. So there have been all these layers of foundational work, infrastructure put into place to get us to this point. And obviously the most important development here has been that we are seeing a decline of Omicron. We're seeing a decline of the pandemic, at least in the Philadelphia area, a decline in deaths, a decline in hospitalizations, a decline in spread of the disease. So for all of you who got your vaccinations and all of you who got your masks and wore your masks, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It has had an impact. Turns out that science works. Are there any other questions?
How long will it take to get to a point where we're no longer backlogged?
That's a wonderful question. How long will it take us to get to a point where we're no longer backlogged? You know, that's hard to say. It's a reflection of a lot of different things, but I will say this, it will go a lot more quickly if we are all properly funded, if we are at full strength in terms of court staffing, in terms of defense attorney staffing and compensation, in terms of prosecutor staffing and compensation. All of that will help. It would also help, for example, if the district attorney's office had more DA's detectives, something we've been working on now for a couple of years, but the police department is having its own staffing issues. And that interferes with our ability to get all of the DA's detectives we would like to have, who could play a very meaningful role in many different ways with work that we are doing. I can't give you an exact period of time, but I can tell you we're definitely on the right track. More serious cases sometimes take more time. When you have a lot of homicide cases and a lot of first-degree felony rape cases, you're going to have more trials. You're going to have more jury trials because the stakes are so much higher. And that's why it's hard for me to give you an exact answer, but I think a lot of us would be delighted to see success or very major progress over the next year. The number of open cases right before the pandemic I have, and it is 28,465 cases just before the judicial emergency came down. The number now is approximately 5,000 more. It's 33,433, but understand these 33,000 cases include a bigger batch of more serious cases among them that are potentially more time consuming at every level. Are there any other questions related to the subject of the press conference? Okay. Are there any other questions at all? Yes, sir, Mr. Dean. I'm sorry?
I would like to say a little later about
Okay. All right, very good. Any other questions?
What's the hit and run crashes in the city? Do we have any specifics on that in terms of numbers? How many have happened this year, and how many have led to an arrest on those?
I heard most of that. I think you're asking about hit and run crashes. I don't have it with me, obviously not the topic, but we'll be happy to try to provide you with information. Jane Rowe is here. If you would speak to her, we'll see what we can do to get you some data on that. Are there any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who came.
One other thing, can we get Spanish now?
Spanish?
Yes.
For me?